Fox 11 is going beyond the podium as you decide 2025.
Hello everyone, I'm Michelle Melby with this Fox 11 Town Hall special to meet the candidates running for Wisconsin Supreme Court. The outcome of this race will likely determine how the court will lean, whether it will continue with a liberal majority or flip to conservative. Justice Ann Walsh Bradley is retiring after serving on the bench for nearly 3 decades. This leaves one vacant seat on the court. Waukesha County Judge Brad Schimel is running. He is backed by Republicans. Dane County Judge Susan Crawford is also running, backed by Democrats. For this town hall special, we sat down with both candidates to hear directly from them on the issues important to Wisconsin voters. Each candidate was asked the same questions and given about the same time to speak. We start our conversation with Judge Susan Crawford. We're a couple of weeks away from the election. Lots of voters still getting to know you, still getting to know the issues and the candidates. Let's start with some of those questions to get to know you better. Why did you get into this race?
Well, this election has really high stakes. It's going to determine the future of our state for our kids, for our grandkids, and it's going to affect the fundamental rights and freedoms of every Wisconsinite. And I've always looked throughout my career for the opportunities to do the most good, to help Wisconsinites and protect them under our laws and Constitution. I've been on the circuit court bench as a judge now for a little over 6.5 years, and this is an opportunity to do justice at a statewide level. So that's really why I decided to get in the race.
When you say the high stakes, what are some of those specifics that you talk about or mean with that?
Yeah, well, just looking at the current term of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, they've decided critical issues involving elections and the right to vote. They have 2 cases pending a decision regarding women's reproductive health care rights. There are issues before the court about regulations involving PFAS contamination, that's affecting, so many Wisconsinites by contaminating drinking water. So just a whole wide array of issues.
What do you want the voters to know about you specifically?
Well, I want voters to know a little bit about my background and my values and how I came to be the person that I am now. I grew up in Chippewa Falls. I was one of 4 kids. I had 2 brothers and a little sister, and my little sister was born with special needs and needed a lot of extra help. So as her big sister, I was often the one who was, in charge, making sure she got to school safe and got home again, and protecting people is something that I started with really early. Then when I was in high school, my dad, who was an engineer, was laid off after his company downsized, and my family went through some real, tough times financially. So we really had to pull together, and I did my part by financing my college education. I went to Lawrence University, right in the Fox Valley, and got really generous support from them, but also spent a lot of hours in the cafeteria dish room, scrubbing dishes to pay my tuition. So I learned things like the value of hard work and honesty and, common sense from those early experiences. Then as a lawyer, I've had a broad career handling a wide variety of different cases, but spent many years as a prosecutor, making sure our communities were protected and that crime victims had a role in the process. Then stood up for people in court, protecting their rights. And as I said, now I'm a judge and really work hard to do justice every day for the people in my courtroom.
A lot of people have said this contest on April 1st is going to determine which way the court will lean, whether that has a more conservative lean or more liberal. How can you assure them that you will go to cases with impartiality?
Well, that's what I've always done as a judge. I've always been fair and impartial, and I have not brought any kind of a political agenda or a partisan agenda into my work as a judge. I left that all behind when I became a judge. And honestly, I've never really been involved in party politics in Wisconsin, so it was a pretty easy transition for me. And I contrast that with my opponent, Brad Schimel, who is a longtime partisan politician in Wisconsin, has campaigned on a partisan message has been out saying things like he wants to be part of Donald Trump's support network, has spoken to the fact that he believes that in 2020, and I'm using his words, that the Wisconsin Supreme Court screwed over Donald Trump when it refused his attempt to throw out over 220,000 Wisconsin voters' ballots in his effort to overturn the election. He has run with a very partisan message, and I believe is trying to politicize the court. So I want Wisconsin voters to understand that and to understand the importance of keeping our Wisconsin Supreme Court non-political and nonpartisan, and making sure that it's doing impartial justice.
We certainly do have a purple state in Wisconsin, lots of passionate views on both sides of the aisle, and there's divisive and hot button topics that come before the court. One of those you alluded to with reproductive rights and abortion. What can you say to this issue, just to give voters an idea of your perspective?
So because there is a case before the Wisconsin Supreme Court right now in which the validity of that 1849 criminal abortion ban is being challenged, I can't speak to how I would rule on such a case. It's just not appropriate for judges to prejudge cases in that way. I will note that my opponent has done so. He has said that in his view that 1849 law is perfectly fine. He says nothing wrong with that law. So I don't do that. I don't prejudge cases in that way. But what I can say is that this is an issue of personal importance to me. You know, I'm a woman and a mom. I have gone through pregnancy and a difficult labor and birth, and when I was having those experiences, I wanted to be able to make my own decisions about my health care with my doctors and not have anyone from the government intervening and trying to tell me what to do. And when the Dobbs decision came down, which is the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, first of all, I thought it was deeply wrong for the Supreme Court to be throwing out a nearly 50-year-old precedent that women had been able to rely on for decades as protection under the Constitution. That's the first time, I believe, the Supreme Court has ever done that, stripped away constitutional rights that had previously been recognized. But what it means to me personally is that my 23-year-old daughter does not have the same rights under the Constitution that I had when I was 23 years old. And that's why we're in this situation we're in now, where all of these issues are being relitigated again after 50 years. You know, it was the Supreme Court getting enough, you know, very conservative justices, you know, through recent appointments to finally have the number of votes that they needed to overturn that precedent. And I don't think courts should do that.
Money has always been an issue with campaigns, millions of dollars coming into this race. Voters might be skeptical of a candidate being able to be impartial when they're talking about dollar amounts in the millions. What can you say to assure the voters that you wouldn't be influenced by some of those donors?
Yeah, well, I have appreciated the support that my campaign has received, especially in this climate we're in right now. My opponent is getting millions and millions of dollars of support from Elon Musk, who has waded into this race. He has spent $10 million and counting, and I expect that that amount could even be doubled before we get to the election. He has essentially taken over the Shimmel campaign's operations. He's doing paid canvassing, he's doing mailers, he's doing these terrible false TV ads that attack me, and a whole series of ads that are intended to appear to be ads supportive of me, but to take far left positions that they claim that I support and that I don't. Just a lot of dark money and dirty tricks involved in this race. And what I have told any organization or any individual who wants to support me is, I welcome your support, but I am going to be an impartial justice on the Supreme Court. I am not going to be advancing a partisan agenda. And if that is what you want to see on the Supreme Court is fairness and impartiality, then I welcome your support. But I make no promises. Unlike my opponent, I'm not going to say how I might decide any case because that's improper and it's against the judicial rules of conduct.
Is that difficult sometimes to put your personal feelings or thoughts or beliefs aside as far in a position of being a judge or justice?
Well, I've had a lot of practice at it, and I have made decisions as a judge in Dane County on issues that, if I were a politician or a voter, I might decide differently. It involved a policy that I either agreed with or disagreed with, and I put that aside and I make a decision based on the law.
Okay. Differences between you and your opponent?
I think what it comes down to is that I'm a common sense judge. I am nonpartisan, and I've pledged to interpret the laws and Constitution to protect the rights of all Wisconsinites. And my opponent is an extreme politician, somebody who has not been successful in transitioning from his role as a partisan politician back when he was a Republican Attorney General to setting that aside once he became a judge. Even as a judge, he has been involved in things like being the master of ceremonies for county Republican fundraisers. He was out canvassing last fall for partisan candidates, Republican candidates. He attended the inauguration in the fall, and I think that's fine as far as the official parts of it, but he was also attending high-ticket galas thrown by far-right groups, right-wing groups, as political fundraisers. And those are partisan activities that judges should not be participating in. He has also been very open from the time he launched his campaign about pledging to, quote unquote, nationalize this race. He was saying that way before I even announced my candidacy. He said that he was going to exploit the connections that he made as a Republican Attorney General with conservative groups, these kind of wealthy interests all around the nation, to fund his campaign. And he's even bragged about being on his knees, wearing out his knee pads, begging for contributions from these groups. That is the distinction here. I'm running to be a judge who will apply the law fairly and impartially to protect Wisconsinites, and he is saying that he wants to be part of a support network for a partisan politician.
Okay, how about another big issue with Act 10? Of course, that's where most of the collective bargaining rights for most public employees, workers, were taken away or eliminated. I know you represented teachers trying to overturn that. Yes. How about with that particular case, because that's pending? What do you say to voters? Can you be impartial in that case where you've been involved in the past?
Well, one thing I'd like voters to understand is that although people tend to talk about Act 10 like it was one unitary law, it is actually a 50-page long act that made changes to all kinds of different provisions in the Wisconsin statutes. So I was involved in some litigation challenging one of those provisions for public school teachers back when the law was first enacted. There is now another lawsuit working its way through the court system that could very well end up in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We'll see. It's not there yet. But that case involves a different provision of the law than the one I was involved in litigating. So if I am on the court and that case does come to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, I would take a close look at it in terms of who the parties are, what the issues are that they're raising, particularly what provisions of the law they are challenging, and make a decision at that time about whether I can be fair and impartial in sitting on that case. Again, it's not appropriate for me to make that decision now because that's, it's not the time. The issue isn't ripe yet, but I will, I can pledge to voters that I will look at that and I will only sit on that case if I believe that I can be fair and impartial in making a decision.
Final thoughts on what you would like to say to any of the voters of Wisconsin who haven't decided on this race?
Yeah. Well, this is a really important election, and it's not one that voters should sit out. These spring elections tend to be lower turnout, and they are among, I think, the most important elections that we have in Wisconsin. So I would urge voters to do a little homework and find out about the candidates and make sure that what they're voting for takes into account the fact that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is about the law, and it's not about politics. It's not about partisanship. And we need justices on the Supreme Court who have not only given lip service to or pledged to be impartial, but are living as impartial judges and not saying one thing in front of a general audience and saying different things when they're in front of their political allies, as Brad Schimel has.
Judge Brad Schimel is the other candidate running for Wisconsin Supreme Court. I sat down with him as well, and here now is that conversation. Let's start off with, why did you want to get into this race?
Well, I didn't want to. This had never been my plan. I've run for statewide office before as Attorney General twice, and statewide campaigning is grueling. It takes you away from your family. It's a really unhealthy thing to do. You don't really eat right. You don't get the kind of sleep you should. There's no time for exercising. It's all, except when you're running late for something. That's about all the exercise you get. So it wasn't my plan, but I watched in 2023. We had a campaign for Supreme Court where there were open promises about how the candidate was going to rule on cases that weren't even filed yet. She wasn't even on the court yet. That is the end of our legal system. If judges, and particularly justices, the highest court in the state, are no longer objective, are no longer waiting to hear the facts of the case, no longer waiting to research the law, to hear the arguments of the attorneys and apply the law to the facts and the arguments, there's nothing left of our legal system then. Then litigants go to court, and you've already lost based on the identity of the judge hearing your case, not on the merits of your case itself. That's why I got in this race, because we needed someone who was going to run to restore that objectivity to the court.
What do you think are some of the maybe high stakes that are in play here with this race?
Oh, certainly there are cases that are going to have enormous implications for Wisconsinites. There are battles between the respective powers of the legislative and executive branch in our state that the court is likely to have to resolve. Big things that are going to affect our future of our state for a long time to come. Many other cases. These things are going to need an objective review that's going to set aside who the parties are. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican legislature or a Democrat governor. You have to think about this long term. This will switch. There will be a day when Democrats will be in charge of the legislature and there'll be a Republican governor. Wisconsin goes back and forth. We need to be thinking long term in these decisions, not about thinking about who's in front of you now. And that's actually something about the oath that judges take. Normal politicians, all elected officials, all take an oath that they swear to defend and protect the Constitution. Judges take an additional oath where we promise that we will administer justice without regard to persons. That doesn't mean we don't care about people. What it means is that we don't care who's sitting in front of us. It doesn't matter. It's the law, it's the facts of the case that matter in the case. That, again, is why I got in this race, to restore that kind of objectivity.
What do you want the voters to know about you specifically?
Well, I've been 35 years as a public servant. So for 35 years, my only client has been the people of Wisconsin. I worked hard as a district attorney for 25 years to protect crime victims, to bring justice for our communities. I have then served as Wisconsin's Attorney General, where I worked hard to defend Wisconsin's law, the way it was written by the legislature, to enforce the law, to build coalitions that made our state stronger. And then as a judge for over 6 years now, I've enjoyed the opportunity to be politics-free in my courtroom. And that's what I'm looking forward on the Supreme Court, is to take politics out of that branch of government, let the political branches argue about that.
There's been a lot said about the outcome of this contest, how it's going to affect the lean of the court, whether it's conservative, liberal. What can you say to voters? How can you assure them that you'll be impartial on these cases that you're listening to?
Well, that's been my whole history, my career for 35 years. I've worked with, right now, I have over 3/4 of the elected sheriffs in Wisconsin are publicly endorsing my campaign. That means quite a few Democrat elected sheriffs are publicly endorsing my campaign because they worked with me when I was Attorney General and District Attorney. They know that I put the people I serve first. I put politics aside in favor of public safety. They know that about me, and that's why they're backing me in this race. That's the strongest guarantee I can make. Any candidate can sit here and promise things, but I'm telling you that the people who are out there protecting our streets every day, they know this, and they're telling you that on my behalf.
Wisconsin is certainly a swing state. Lots of passionate feelings on both sides of lots of hot-button issues. One of those issues is abortion. What can you say on this issue to give voters a little bit of your perspective?
Well, my family has a unique perspective on this. My wife and I are adoptive parents. 23 and 21 years ago, two young women in Wisconsin had the courage and made the sacrifice to give us a family we can't have biologically. They were 18, living at home, still in school. You can imagine how difficult that was for them. We saw how difficult it was for them, and we are eternally grateful to them. And because of that, my wife and I, we treasure life even when it's unplanned. But judges don't make the law. This matter belongs in the hands of the voters. There should not be any 4 justices on the Wisconsin Supreme Court deciding this for all Wisconsinites. This decision needs to be made by them, and I will respect the will of the voters. When I put on my black robe as a judge or as a Supreme Court justice, I put my own personal views aside. They're utterly irrelevant to the decision I need to make. That's what's so satisfying about being a judge for a job. In my past careers as prosecutor and attorney general, there were all sorts of people trying to inject politics in what you're doing. As a judge, it's liberating that you can set it aside and decide this based on the law.
Is that sometimes difficult to do, to put those personal opinions or feelings aside when you're in that role?
It really isn't. Like I said, it's a liberating part of this work. We ask that of every juror that serves on a jury trial. I will tell all of them, I'll get out my pen, and I don't have one in my pocket, unfortunately, but as we're doing jury selection, I'll hold up a pen with a clicker, and I'll click the top, and I'll say, I don't have one of those Men in Black pens that erases all your memories. You have to live with the fact, you have to accept the fact that you have a history, you have political views, you have personal views. I'm asking you, as you consider whether you can serve on this jury objectively or not, can you set those aside and be truly impartial? And that's the commitment we expect from every juror that hears a case, and they keep that commitment. It's the same commitment we should expect of every judge, and particularly every justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. And it's not hard if you set your mind to it and you're willing to respect the oath you took and keep that commitment.
Money is certainly another big issue, or it's been talked a lot about, especially with this campaign, just the millions and millions of dollars being spent and coming into this race. Some voters might be skeptical of a candidate's ability to be impartial, like you were just talking about. What do you say to voters to ensure that you're not going to be influenced by some of these donors?
With my campaign, I've been blessed that many people have contributed, some small amounts, some large amounts. I'll say this, 97% of the donors to my campaign vote in Wisconsin. My opponents' donors, nearly 50% of them don't vote in Wisconsin because they don't live here. And I think it's important that Wisconsinites decide who's on their Wisconsin Supreme Court, not people from other parts of the country. Yeah, the money's a problem, and this is going to be, again, the most expensive court race in American history, topping 2023. I'm very concerned. My opponent has, by now, already spent $19 million on television. We don't know where that money's come from yet because there's not a campaign finance report due just yet. We don't know where that money came from. This is a problem. For me, I take the same approach as I do with every case. If you are, whether you're a person who has voted for me or not, it doesn't matter. Or whether you're a person who supported me or not in this campaign or any prior campaign. What matters are the facts of the case and the law that I apply to it.
What are some of the differences between you and your opponent?
Well, as I kind of mentioned, the law enforcement support, the reason I have that law enforcement support is my career as a prosecutor. We don't share that same thing. I talked about how I've had only one client in my career. Well, for my opponent, much of her career, she actually spent suing the people of Wisconsin. Often, when I was Attorney General, we had to defend against lawsuits she brought against the people of Wisconsin. And I'm a judicial conservative. Judicial conservatives believe that judges don't make the law, that we let the legislative branch do that. My opponent is a judicial liberal. Judicial liberals are activists who believe that the court should be involved in crafting or reforming the law into something that fits their idea of what it should be. That's wrong. The legislature should make this, because as a voter, you have access to the legislature. You can petition them. You can contact their office. You can go to their office hours. You can email them. If there's a bill being considered, you can go testify on that bill. And if your local legislator, there are 99 assembly districts in Wisconsin, so very small, relatively small districts. If they're not responsive to what your community wants from them in their representation of you, you can vote them out of office every 2 years. The stakes are very high here because the Supreme Court justice is elected for 10 years and by the whole state. So locally, you have relatively little influence, and it's going to be a long time before you can discharge them from office if they're not doing things the way you think they ought to. So this is a very serious race, and I hope voters are going to pay attention to the issues and get out and vote for April 1st.
One more big issue I want to touch on is Act 10 with collective bargaining rights. What do you say to any critics that question your ability to be impartial with that particular subject?
Well, I've never had any involvement with Act 10, except as a public servant. It has affected me because I've had to pay for part of my own health insurance and for part of my own part of my own pension. But Act 10 was decided to be constitutional by the Wisconsin Supreme Court prior to 2015 when I took office. It was decided also by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in the federal system to be constitutional before I took office. I've never taken any position on that, and I will hear the case objectively. My opponent was the lead attorney who went after Act 10 when she was in private practice. She was proud when she ran for Dane County Circuit Judge. She bragged that she was the attorney that tried to get Act 10 struck down. Now when she's running to all 72 counties, she doesn't brag about that anymore. There's two different candidates, whether you're running in Dane County where she's a circuit judge or running statewide. And we have two justices in the liberal wing of the court who were caught on the campaign trail openly promising that they would strike Act 10 down if they were elected to the Supreme Court. So we've got two that said they'll strike it down, and my opponent who worked hard to get it struck down. The question I think voters need to ask is whether they think if the liberals are in control of the court, Act 10 has any chance of an objective review.
Final thoughts on what you would like to say to the voters of Wisconsin who are still making up their mind.
Well, again, this race could not be more important. People turn out in much larger numbers for the November elections because there the candidates openly promise how they're going to rule on issues, and people see that as more important. I hope that people are starting to see that this April election is every bit as important because this branch of the government, the judicial branch, makes decisions that impact their lives. And I hope that they're going to pay attention to the issues, find out about the candidates, and get out and make an informed vote for April 1st.
So there you have it, conversations with both candidates who would like to be the next justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Voters statewide will have their say on April 1st. We hope this will help you with your decision, and we encourage you to get out and vote. That does it for this Fox 11 Town Hall Special Report. Thank you for joining us.